Welcome to the Maryland Poll Watchers Training. By coming to this training, you are supporting one of the most important functions of a democracy, the right to free and fair elections. The Maryland State Board of Elections is committed to providing equitable elections. All Maryland citizens who are eligible to vote are guaranteed an accessible location to vote, with consistent and fair voting practices across the state. If you go on to become a poll watcher, your job will be to ensure that all relevant guidance and laws are upheld. It is an important job, and I congratulate you on your commitment to this process. The training will give you the tools and the knowledge you need to do this important job. Here are some of the topics we're going to cover today. Election irregularities. You'll see exactly why we need poll watchers. Ensuring election integrity. This is what poll watchers do. Make sure that the election is fair and that all participants follow the law. You'll learn what a poll watcher can do. The answer is quite a lot. By the end of this class, you'll know all of these things. What you need to do before the polls open, how to prepare, everything that needs to happen when the polls open, handling polling or voting, how to close the polls, and everything you need to do at the end of polling. The objectives of this training are that by the end of the class, you will be able to do each of these things. Explain the role of a poll watcher, identify responsibilities of a poll watcher, describe key events in the poll opening, polling, and poll closing processes, identify common sources of election irregularities, and perform the duties of a poll watcher. Let's look at a major reason we need poll watchers: election irregularities. An election irregularity is sometimes an honest mistake in a process, but it can also be an intentional disregard for the law. The reason doesn't matter. What matters is that the law is followed so we can ensure fair elections. What are some examples of irregularities? What can happen if they're allowed to occur? Some examples will result in fraud or lack of faith in the process, intimidation of voters, and lower turnouts. Here are some recent cases of voting irregularity in Maryland. In 2012, Maryland congressional candidate Wendy Rosen was found guilty of duplicate voting in both Maryland and Florida for the same elections. She was given 5 years probation and a $5,000 fine, and she, of course, was not allowed to run for Congress. Also in 2012, 2 Maryland women from different counties admitted that they voted for their dead mothers. In August of 2012, Election Integrity Maryland and True the Vote together found 173 cases of duplicate voting between Maryland and Florida. Yes, irregularities in Maryland do occur, and they do result in fraud. The impact of election irregularities are obvious. Every fraudulent vote negates a valid one. So keeping elections honest is an essential job. Here are a few examples of irregularities inside and outside Maryland's borders. In the year 2000, when George W. Bush and Al Gore were candidates for president, the election was won by just 537 votes in Florida, as certified by the Secretary of State, Kathleen Harris. That's a difference of a fraction of 1%. Some allege that fraudulent votes were counted and illegal ones were not. There were many voter irregularities. Other issues can also affect the integrity of voting. Here is an example. In 2008, the Maryland Task Force found evidence that poor and minority communities were underserved in polling places. Lines were much longer than in more affluent areas, which meant many registered voters gave up and went home. Another issue that can affect voting is called the down ballot effect. It's not really an irregularity, but it's helpful to be aware of it. Down ballot effects. Sometimes voters are heavily influenced by the vote at the top of the ballot, which is generally for a higher office. If that person is particularly popular or particularly unpopular, voters might simply vote for or against the party rather than considering the issues. The best way to help voters make informed decisions is by providing them with the information that they need. Outside the polling place, literature explaining the issues and describing the candidates can be made available. Inside the polling place, only a list of candidates and issues is available. Poll watchers are not permitted to give any information that would help a voter make a choice. As citizens who support the process, you can circulate information before voting day, but not once you enter the polling place as a poll watcher. You have another equally important role to play. Ensuring integrity. What can a poll watcher do? First, presence offers a deterrent. Just being in the polling place, observing all that takes place, is enough to deter many from attempting voter fraud. Your presence encourages election officials to be more aware of their actions and to remember the proper election rules and procedures. Often, election officials have been doing it for many years, and with or without fraudulent intent, they can forget and/or take shortcuts in violation of proper election procedures and rules. You should report and record all possible irregularities. Election officials cannot see everything. It will be your job to observe, take notes, and report anything that departs from correct procedure and practice to your local Board of Elections. You should also ensure enumeration of cast ballots. You have a role in ensuring that all the ballots are correctly counted. We will cover a lot more. Right now, we're going to look at what is required to be a poll watcher. Who can poll watch? What training do you need? What certificates, qualifications do you need? Where can you poll watch? When can you poll watch? And what materials do you need? Who can poll watch? In the basic sense of the term, anyone can be a poll watcher. Any citizen who is a registered voter can enter a polling place and challenge the right of any other individual to vote. But certified poll watchers have additional rights and can play an expanded role in the process. According to Maryland law, a vote may only be challenged on the grounds of identity. Voters must be who they say they are. Who can challenge a voter? This is very important. An individual's right to vote can be challenged for one reason and one reason alone. He or she is not who they claim to be. No other challenges are permitted, not even if the person is not a legal voter. In addition, the challenge must be made before the person receives the voter authority card, or is issued a ballot, or enters the voting booth. Do you know a convicted felon may vote if he or she has completed the sentence in any following probation? According to Maryland law, legislation passed in 2007, felons who have completed any probation must re-register using any standard voter registration process, and then their right to vote is restored. Different states have different laws on this matter. If you have a good reason to believe that the person is using someone else's name, you can issue a challenge. You cannot, however, challenge a person based upon color, ethnicity, religion, or appearance. To do so could violate the person's civil rights. If an election judge believes that you are interfering with the proper voting procedures, you can be asked to leave. More information about challenges will be covered later in this training. How do you become an accredited watcher? You must be registered to vote in Maryland. You must be designated a challenger and watcher, which means you must possess a valid and signed challenger and watcher certificate. And you should participate in election judge training. This is only recommended, it's not required. Who can designate challengers and watchers? A designated challenger or a watcher must be designated by one of these groups: the Maryland State Board of Elections for any polling place in the state, or the local boards of election, or a candidate, including any write-in candidate who has filed a certificate of candidacy, or a recognized political party, or a group of voters supporting or opposing a candidate, principle, or proposition on the ballot. To be eligible to designate challengers and watchers, the group of voters must form a political committee under Section 13-207 of the Election Law Article. The individual or group who designates you as a challenger or a watcher can revoke the designation at any time. If you wish the State Board of Elections to designate you or members of your organization as a challenger and watcher, you must submit your request in writing, and your request must identify early voting centers or polling places that you're willing to work in more than one county. You are strongly encouraged to submit your request at least 1 month before the election in which you wish to be designated. If approved, you will receive your certification, which you will need to take to the polling place you are assigned. What constitutes a valid challenger and watcher certificate? A candidate or representative of a group authorized to designate you as a challenger and watcher must sign a challenger and watcher certificate and give it to you. You will need to bring this signed certificate with you to the polling place and give it to the chief judge at the polling place. This certificate is your proof that you are an accredited challenger and watcher. You don't need to bring the original. You can bring a copy if you prefer. Who else will be at the polling place? Chief judges, check-in judges, voting unit judges, and provisional judges. We'll go over the roles and the responsibilities for each of these positions. We'll also talk about which people you can interact with and which are not related to your role as a poll watcher. You are not permitted to talk to some of them. These terms are used by the state of Maryland. Not all counties use the same terms for election judges, and in some counties, judges play multiple roles. For example, in Prince George's County, there are 5 types of judges: chief judges, election judges, provisional judges, alternate election judges, and closing judges. In Montgomery County, there are 3 types: chief judge, voting operations judge, and closer judge, also known as assistant chief. In Harford County, there are 7 types: chief judge, check-in judge, unit judge, provisional judge, technical judge, greeters, and standby judges. All judges receive payment for their services, though the stipend varies for each county. Election judges cannot be a candidate or currently hold a public or political office. This includes state and county political central committee members. In addition, they cannot be a chairman, a campaign manager, or a treasurer for a political or candidate committee. State employees may be election judges. They are entitled to use administrative leave if they would otherwise be scheduled to work, and they can keep the compensation for being a judge. Chief judges. Each polling place has 2 chief judges. Typically, one will be a Democrat and one will be a Republican, but rules vary by county. For example, in Baltimore County, unaffiliated voters are only considered when not enough Democrats and Republicans apply. In Queen Anne County, an election judge may be a Democrat, a Republican, unaffiliated, or a member of another recognized party, but the chief judges are always a Democrat and a Republican. The chief judges are responsible for supervising everything that happens in the polling place. Only experienced judges are considered for this position. Chief judges are responsible for picking up supplies needed to conduct the election day business. They hold a meeting of all the judges the night before the election. They check the voting machines to make sure that they've been delivered and that the telephone is operating in the polling room. They open the polling place on time. They guarantee that all procedures are followed in the polling place on election day. They supervise the precinct tally of votes cast after the close of the polls. And they see to it that all forms are properly completed and return the supplies and canvass report to the election office. If there's any question about voting conduct in a precinct, both chief election judges are held accountable. Your only point of contact as a poll watcher is with the chief judges. Do not speak to any other judge. If only one chief judge is there when the poll opens, under the advice from the Attorney General, the election judges present must open the polling place by the required time. This means that even if only one chief judge is there, it must open on time. Let's talk about check-in judges. Check-in judges are responsible for verifying each voter who comes to vote. They use an electronic poll book, which is an electronic tablet-like device that lists the state list of registered voters. The names have been entered into by the local boards. There are many safeguards to ensure that the poll book is accurate and complete. Poll books are sealed by the local boards after they load the most recent voter registration lists. Before voting begins, election judges compare the seal number against the number recorded on the paperwork provided by the local board. Once this has been verified, the election judges remove the seal, open the case, and remove the poll book. The election judges then compare the second seal number and inventory tag number on the poll books against the numbers recorded on the paperwork. When these numbers have been verified, the election judges connect the poll books, turn them on, verify that the poll book is for the correct precinct, and print a report that verifies that no voters are checked in to vote yet. The voting units are kept sealed until Election Day morning, when they are opened by judges who confirm that there is tamper tape covering access to the compartment with the power button and the memory card. As a poll watcher, you have the right to observe this process, but you cannot stand and look over the shoulder of the election judge or interfere with their work in any way. The election judges will read the voting unit seal numbers and tamper tape numbers out loud so that you can hear the numbers and, if you wish, record them on your paperwork. But they are not required to describe the tasks they are performing or answer questions. Once the poll books have been loaded and voting has begun, the check-in judges will check each new voter. Typically, a check-in judge will verify information on file with the voter's name, address, and date of birth. They will print a voter authority card, assist voters who may be in the wrong polling location, and check voter identification for first-time voters, and assist with the closing of the electronic poll books and polls. Keep in mind that few Maryland voters are required to show any type of identification. The check-in judge will simply ask a voter for their name, address, and month and date of their birth to verify a voter's identity. Identification will only be requested if all of these things are true: that the voter is voting for the first time in Maryland, and that they have not previously met the identification requirements of the Board of Elections. Many types of identification are acceptable in Maryland. A copy of a current and valid photo ID, such as a Maryland driver's license, or an ID card, a student, employee, or military ID, a U.S. passport, or any other state or federal government-issued ID card, or a copy of a current utility bill, a bank statement, a government check, a paycheck, or other government document that shows your name and address. Current means that the document is dated within 3 months of the election. Voting unit judges. Voting unit judges escort voters to available voting units and answer questions about voting on the voting unit. Typically, they also help set up voting equipment, help voters who request help, and collect voter access cards, pull reports, and shut down the system at the end of the day. These judges are on their feet for most of the day. Provisional judges. A provisional judge is also known as a provisional ballot judge and handles the ballots for citizens whose names are not on the register for whatever reason. In some areas, the chief judge also serves as the provisional judge. Provisional ballots are required in several circumstances. An error may have been made, the person may be in the wrong polling area, or a registration may not have been updated. If someone challenges a person's right to vote, a provisional ballot is required unless identification can be produced that certifies the person is the registered voter and that he or she is who they claim to be. A provisional ballot allows someone who thinks he or she is an eligible voter to vote. The person's ballot will be counted if the local Board of Elections can determine that the person is registered and eligible to vote in Maryland. If a provisional ballot is cast by a voter who is ineligible to vote, the provisional ballot may be rejected. A provisional ballot is not an alternative to the electronic voting system. It provides a way for registered voters to exercise their right to vote when irregularities occur, whether or not those irregularities are beyond the voter's control. Provisional ballots for registered voters are always counted, even if they will not change the outcome of an election. Let's review. Who else will be at the polling place? Chief judges, 1 Democrat, 1 Republican. They supervise the voting place, oversee all activities, and serve as the poll watcher's sole point of contact. Check-in judges. Check-in judges are responsible for verifying each voter who arrives to vote. Voting unit judges. They escort voters to available voting units, answer questions about voting on the voting unit, and provisional judges. They administer provisional voting. Poll watcher's checklist. Now that you know the roles of other people in the process, it's time to start planning for your arrival at the polling place. Here are some things you'll need to bring with you. Some are required, others are strongly recommended. Voter registration card. You are required to be a registered voter, so it's a good idea to bring proof of this with you. Proper identification. This supports your voter registration card in verifying that you are who you say you are. Signed and properly dated Challenger and Watcher certificate. You will need a minimum of 3 copies since you will need to give one to each chief judge, and you are also required to have one with you. With this signed certificate, you are considered an accredited Challenger and Watcher. Please obtain or ask the designated entity to give you extra copies of your certificate so that you can give the election judges a copy of your certificate when you visit a polling place. Remember, the election judge has the right to determine if you are a certified poll watcher, so bring your credentials. Incident report forms. If available, you may be provided with blank incident report forms to be used for recording specific election irregularities that you may observe. Contact numbers. Be sure to have the contact numbers for the person or the organization that designated you as a poll watcher and the local Board of Elections contact information. You will need these in the event that you have to report irregularities. A watch. You will need to record the time or times of any incidences you observe. Remember that you won't have your cell phone. Notepad. You will need to write down any irregularity that you observe. You'll learn more about this later in the course. Pen and pencil. Bring at least 2 in case your ink runs out or your pencil point breaks. A folding chair. Don't assume that there will be a chair for you. Election officials are not required to provide you with one. Lunch or snacks. You may need to be there all day, and it's a very long day, at least 15 hours. Medications. If you take any regular medication, bring it with you. It's smart to bring other items such as aspirin if you think you might need them. Parking location. Know in advance where you can park your car. And don't forget, you have to vote too. What should you not bring into the polling place? Certain things are forbidden or have very restricted use in the polling place. It's important to be aware of this. Electronic devices, newspapers or news magazines, or anything with a political message. We'll go through each of these in turn. Use of electronic devices in the polling place is prohibited. Cameras, cell phones, pagers, laptops, iPads, PDAs, and other electronic services cannot be used in the polling place. You may carry an electronic device into the polling place, but you are prohibited from using it. In general, it's smart not to bring the device with you. You can always keep your cell phone and other electronics in your car. A possible exception is your cell phone, since you may need to call the Board of Elections. If you do bring a cell phone, be sure the phone is turned off, not just on vibrate. You must leave the polling place and the no electioneering zone in order to use your cell phone, so leaving it in your car may be the best practice. Even as a poll watcher, you are not permitted to take pictures or videos. Later in the course, we'll show you how to recognize the no electioneering zone. Do not bring newspapers or political magazines. This is a recommendation, not a requirement. It is hard to predict what a judge or another person in the polling place may interpret as political or news, and you must not give the appearance of supporting any issue or candidate. This prohibition includes Kindle or any other e-book type reader. To be safe, keep those items in your car. All political items and apparel are prohibited from the polling place. Lastly, you cannot bring any political materials, newspapers, or news magazines into the polling place or wear anything with a political message. This includes buttons, shirts, hats, stickers, and the like. Anything that someone reasonably or even unreasonably might interpret as political should be avoided. It is best to avoid anything with the name of an organization on it. For example, a T-shirt from an organic farm, which might be fine in any other year, might have implications, as in the recent dispute over zoning for an organic farm in Montgomery County. A sports team shirt may be controversial if the owner has endorsed a candidate or a proposal. Don't take a chance. Avoid anything with a name. What should not be brought into the polling place? Electronic devices. That includes cameras, cell phones, pagers, laptops, or PDAs. Newspapers or news magazines. Anything with a political message, clothing, hats, t-shirts, etc., printed material, buttons, stickers, etc. When should you arrive at the polling place? Arrive at the polling place at least 30 minutes before voting begins. In Maryland, that means you need to arrive by 9:30 a.m. on early voting days and 6:30 a.m. on general election days. You may prefer to arrive 1 hour before the polls open, which is typically when the judges begin setting up. During early voting, voting starts at 10 a.m., except on Sundays. On Sundays, voting starts at 12 p.m. If you are late, you may not enter the polling place until voting begins. You may enter or be present at the polling place at any time during voting hours. What should you do when you arrive at the polling place? First, introduce yourself to the chief judges. Give each of them a copy of your challenger and watcher certificate, and be prepared to present identification if requested. If you do not have an extra copy for a judge who requests one, present your certificate so that he or she can record your information on the judge's log. A good relationship with the judges is important, so be friendly, but also be respectful of their time. They have a lot to accomplish before the polls open. Remember that you have the right to observe, but you do not have the right to get in their way. Being a silent observer is the wisest course. What happens before the polls open? A lot happens before the polls open. Your eyes will be important for each of these. Electronic poll books are set up. They use an electronic poll book, which is an electronic tablet-like device that lists the state's list of registered voters. The names have been entered by the local boards. Polling place signs are posted. Election judges post signs to help voters find their polling place. These signs should be clearly visible. Provisional ballots are accounted. Election judges ensure that these ballots are available for those who may need them. Voting units are opened and prepared for voting. Election judges are trained on the care, control, and custody of all voting equipment. Because of this training, any attempt to tamper with the terminals will be immediately visible to them. What does a poll watcher do before the polls open? Election judges are typically very busy before polls open. One of the processes they must complete is the opening of the voting units and the printing of the zero report. A zero report verifies that a voting machine has no votes recorded on it. To do this, the election judges must remove tamper tape from the voting units. Tamper tape is designed to reveal evidence if someone may have opened the voting machine. As a poll watcher, you may record the seal and tamper tape numbers. You need to do this for each and every voting unit. The election judges will read these aloud, which will enable you to write them down quickly. It is important not to delay the judges. Keep in mind that while you may look, you may not touch any election document or equipment. Verify that the new tamper tape has been applied. Once the judges have printed the zero reports, the judges reseal the side compartment with the new tamper tape and record the new tamper tape number. This certifies that the voting unit is ready for voting. The judges repeat this process for each voting unit. The process of reapplying new tamper tape to each voting machine ensures that there will be evidence of tampering should a voting machine be opened during the polling day. As a poll watcher, you may also observe the printing of the zero report. Review, but do not touch this report, which is signed by the election judges. The zero report lists all of the candidates and all of the possible responses for ballot questions. It verifies that no ballots were cast or recorded before the polls officially opened. The judges review the report and verify that no votes have been cast. One copy of the zero report is posted for review. The second report is signed by the election judges. The second copy remains in the voting unit during voting hours. Note that the public counter shows the total votes cast on the machine for the current election and that it should be 0 at the beginning of the polling day. What else does a poll watcher do before the polls open? You verify that no voters have been checked in on the electronic poll books. During the opening of the polls, be sure that you do not get in the way of the election officials. If you cause any delay or inconvenience to election officials, this could be grounds for them to request that you leave. It is unlikely that you will discover irregularities in recording of tamper tape numbers and printing of zero reports. However, your presence can ensure that election officials follow the proper procedures during the opening of the polling place. Poll watcher don'ts. Both before and during the election process, certain cautions are very important. Never interfere with the work of the election judges. In general, avoid bothering them. You're a watcher, not a doer in this process. Never touch any election documents or equipment. Your role is to observe and note problems, not to make adjustments or corrections. Preventing the timely opening of the polls is grounds for your removal. Even with your certification, you may be removed from the polling place if a majority of the election judges in the polling place agree that your presence will prevent the timely opening of the polls. Never ask questions of any election judge other than the chief election judge. Remember that the chief judge is your sole point of contact, and questions to him or her should be limited to what is necessary for you to do your job effectively. This concludes the section on what to do before polling begins. In the next section of this course, we will cover what happens once the doors open and the voters walk in. While polling is conducted, what can a watcher do? Once the doors open and voters begin to enter, you have a new set of tasks. You should observe voters checking in. This is an important part of your role. If you suspect a person is not who he or she says, you can challenge the voter's identity. Maintain a list of voters. If you brought a list of voters, it's a good idea to check them off as they come in to vote. This can be impractical during early voting. Verify the tamper tape and public counter. As time allows, you may ask one of the chief judges to accompany you to the voting units not currently being used by voters to verify the tamper tape and the public counter. View the number of voters checked in. Again, as time allows, ask the chief judge to let you see the number of voters who have been checked in to vote. You can find this number at the bottom center of the lookup screen. Challenge voters. Remember that this can only be done if you question a voter's identity. You are not permitted to challenge on any other grounds, though you can take notes on any concerns that you have. Do your best to make your requests when the polling place is not busy. During peak voting times, a chief judge may not have time to accommodate your request. Whenever possible, ask to verify information during non-peak voting times, when there is limited or no voting activity. Where should a poll watcher be? Once polling starts, remember what you're there to do. Observe the voters. That means that you should be inside the voting room, near the check-in judges, and you should be close enough to hear and see each voter check in. You may stand where you can see the poll book screen if the chief judge allows you to. If that seems obvious, let's move on to discuss where you should not be. It's important to know where you should not be. The chief judge has some discretion in where to position poll watchers. but the poll watcher must be allowed to stand or sit where he or she can view and hear voters check in. The chief judge designates where you can stand. Your location near the check-in is a matter for the chief election judge to decide based on the management of the voting room. As long as you can see and hear voters check in to vote, your location is acceptable. While some judges are very supportive of the role of poll watchers, others will seek any reason possible to have you removed as a poll watcher. Do not give a judge a reason to eject you. There are other prohibitions too. Poll watchers cannot move about in the polling place. While you are permitted to leave if you need to do so, stay in your designated positions while you are in the voting area. Stay near the check-in judges, in this position approved by the chief judge. Poll watchers cannot linger in the no electioneering zone. This zone is generally 100 feet from the entrance and exit of the voting area. We'll take a look at where that is. Remember, you can leave at any time that you want during the day. No electioneering zone. For most polling places, the 100-foot zone is measured from the entrance and exit of the building, not the voting room, that is closest to the part of the building in which voting occurs. If an early voting center is located in a multi-use facility, the no electioneering zone is 100 feet from the space where early voting is being conducted. Carroll and Montgomery counties, the no electioneering zone may be located anywhere between 25 feet and 100 feet from the entrance and exit of the building. What poll watchers can do. You'll definitely be busy because there's a lot that poll watchers can and should do. First, maintain a list of registered voters who have voted or individuals who have cast provisional ballots. You may want to follow up on how the provisional ballots were handled. Additionally, you may want to pass on the information about who has not voted yet so that you can help more people get to the polls. While you can't contact anyone while you're inside the voting place or the no electioneering area, you can always step outside that area to make the phone call. Do take written notes about everything you see and hear. That's true even if you're not sure something was actually an irregularity. We'll cover common voting irregularities and how to record the information in just a few minutes. Contact the local Board of Elections to report any observed irregularities. If there are major issues, you will want to step outside and make the call. Again, you can leave and re-enter any time that you want during voting hours, provided that you do not disturb the voting process. Complete a poll watcher incident report. Give one copy to your sponsor and one copy to Election Integrity Maryland. You may want to keep a copy for yourself too. What are some possible irregularities? Certain irregularities happen all too often. You're going to help us stop those problems. Keep in mind that irregularities are not always intentional. While you should always assume that a mistake is an honest mistake, it is important to record every irregularity. This is essential to your role as a poll watcher. Election judges interfering with your rights as a poll watcher. Not all judges will welcome or appreciate your presence in the polling place. As such, you should know your rights and be prepared to assert them in a non-confrontational manner and contact your sponsor should you happen to encounter an election judge who interferes with your rights to observe the polling process. Election official suggesting a voter should vote for a candidate or issue. For example, most people are voting for candidate Smith by checking here. An election official can explain how to use the voting machine, but an election judge may not suggest in any way how the voter should vote for a particular ticket, candidate, or position on a question. There can be a fine line between helping a person understand a choice and guiding the person to a particular choice. So record exactly what you hear. Explaining the meaning of a proposition on the ballot. It is very difficult to explain a proposition in completely objective ways, so explanations are not permitted. Voters must make their own judgments based on the proposition itself. Person not on the list of eligible voters, if, for example, in the wrong precinct or not registered. When this occurs, the prospective voter must either go to the correct precinct or use a provisional ballot. This is an irregularity that should be recorded. There are many more examples of irregularities. Here are 3 more common ones. Campaigning within the no electioneering zone. No one is allowed to campaign within this zone. This includes handing out literature or buttons, promoting a candidate or promoting a proposition, or arguing against a candidate or a proposition. Candidate entering the polling place without a right to be there. Candidates are not permitted to be within polling places unless they are registered to vote in the particular precinct, or if they are themselves an accredited challenger or watcher with a certificate. Person listed as having already voted in early voting. Again, this voter should be offered a provisional ballot. It is possible that the person requested an absentee ballot and never used it, but that cannot be determined in the voting place. Record this as an irregularity. In general, report any unusual occurrences, particularly if it interferes with voting. For example, if there's a power outage, it should be reported. If the polling place opens or closes at a different time than Maryland law requires, that should also be reported. Other things to record might include any voter who causes a disturbance, or voters who do not receive the assistance they are entitled to receive, or any attempt to intimidate people from voting or to vote in a particular way. When should I make a challenge? The primary role of a poll watcher is to watch, not to challenge. Maryland law is very clear. The only legal grounds to challenge a person's right to vote is identity. If you are reasonably certain that a person is not who they say they claim to be, you can issue a challenge. It is essential to do so before the person receives a voter authority card or a ballot. Remember, anyone can issue a challenge. However, only a certified poll watcher can remain in the polling place after a challenge. Ordinary citizens must exit immediately after they vote. Now let's look at the steps involved in making a challenge. There are clear steps that must be taken. First, notify an election judge. Remember that your challenge must occur before the person received the ballot. The election judge will ask the person to show identification. Any of these forms of identification are considered acceptable. A voter registration card, a social security card, a valid Maryland driver's license, or Maryland MBA issued ID card. Any ID card issued by any unit of the federal, state, or local county municipal governments. Any employee ID card with the individual's photo and issued to the individual in the ordinary course of the employer's business, or a copy of a current bank statement, a government check, a paycheck, other government document that shows the individual's name and current address. If the voter who is challenged can provide acceptable identification, he or she can vote. If not, we move to the next step. The judge will require you or any other challenger to provide the reason for challenge in writing and under the penalty of perjury. You must list very specific reasons for believing that the voter is not who he or she claims to be. This is required on the challenge form. Ordinary citizens who challenge a vote must complete an affidavit provided by the election judge, indicating the basis for his or her challenge. Once that is complete, they must leave the voting place as soon as the challenge is made. Only certified poll watchers can remain after the challenge of a vote. The challenge voter is given the opportunity to cast a provisional ballot, which will be counted if the person's identity can be confirmed. The person must also submit a signed statement witnessed by the election judge that attests to his or her identity. In this slide, you'll see a copy of the affidavit a challenger must sign. Note that you must be very specific about why you believe this person's identity is not what he or she claims it to be. For example, you might write that you went to school with the person the voter claimed to be, or perhaps that he is your neighbor and you know this person is someone else. In addition, you must affirm that belief under the penalty of perjury. In this slide, you'll see the affidavit of a challenged voter. The challenged voter must sign it if he or she cannot produce the acceptable identification but still wants to vote. Note that the voter is asked for the date of birth and any information that might help the board determine whether or not this person is telling the truth about his or her identity. At the bottom of the form is a section for the chief judge and to add any information that might be helpful to the board. Do provisional ballots count in an election? Whether the provisional ballot counts in an election depends on the local board of elections. This is the process. After voting has finished, the election judge will submit any provisional ballots, affidavits, and any materials related to challenges to the Board of Elections. This is done whether or not the ballots can affect the outcome of the election. Next, the local board examines the evidence and makes a determination. If they decide that the person is who he or she claimed to be and is otherwise qualified to vote, the vote will be counted. Poll watcher don'ts. Before we get into recording irregularities, let's make sure you don't cause any of your own. Here are some poll watcher don'ts, as in, don't let this happen to you. Never determine how a voter voted or intends to vote. Your role is to document anything or anyone who tries to influence votes, not to affect how someone votes. And secret ballot means what it says. The voter should have privacy. Never talk in the polling place with any voter. It may be tempting, particularly if a voter tries to strike up a conversation, but you are there as an observer. If you wish to talk with a voter, you must do so outside the polling place and outside the no electioneering zone. If a voter initiates contact with you inside the polling place or within the no electioneering zone, advise the voter that you as a challenger and a watcher are prohibited from talking to him or her inside the polling place and refer the voter to an election judge. Never assist any voter in voting. This must be handled by an election judge. You can direct the voter to the appropriate judge, but you cannot do more. Never physically handle original election document or election equipment. The poll watcher's role is strictly look, don't touch. Never advocate for voters. Your advocacy comes in your reporting. Never exert political influence in any way at the polling place. Again, you are a neutral observer. You cannot act as a voter's advocates or attempt to exercise political influence while in the polling place. This is not the role of a challenger or watcher, and if you do this, you will be removed from the polling place. Directly question the actions of an election judge. Even if the judge is 100% wrong, remember that he or she has the power to eject you from the polling place. Record what you see. The issues can be handled afterwards. If the situation is truly egregious, call the local board once you have left the polling place. And remember that you can only leave during regular voting hours, otherwise you may not be allowed back in. Take these cautions seriously. Doing any of the items listed here could cause an election judge to remove you from the polling place. The least serious is talking to a voter, but it still should not be done, except to refer the voter to an election judge for assistance. What should poll watchers do if they observe an irregularity? Be careful not to react openly. You're a watcher. These are your options. Always record everything you observe, see, and hear. Anything that departs from standard procedure is worth noting. Notify the local Board of Elections. They will handle the issues. This is particularly true if you believe that an election judge has behaved improperly. Keep in mind that you may not have the most recent information or procedures. Follow instructions of the entity or individual that designated you as their challenger or watcher. Remember, complete a poll watcher incident report from your sponsor and make a copy and send it to Election Integrity Maryland. What are the best practices for a poll watcher's log? The poll watcher's log is ultimately one of your most important contributions to the voting process. It documents issues and provides a way for election boards to address existing problems and prevent future problems. Here are some tips for keeping an effective log with the potential to accomplish genuine change. Record just the facts and nothing but the facts. Feelings and perceptions are not actionable unless you are recording observations about voters' spoken perceptions. Avoid interjecting personal opinion into notes. Your opinions are not relevant. Your factual observations are. Record as many details as possible. Sometimes a minor detail can be a key to clarifying an issue, so include as many descriptions and facts as possible. Recording the facts of an incident. In some ways, a poll watcher's log is similar to a reporter's notebook. In both cases, the 5 W's are important. Who? Include the names and the roles of all individuals involved in any incident, including witnesses whose names you know. Record the voting unit numbers too. Keep in mind, though, that you may not talk with voters. What? Include a clear and precise description of what happened in time order. Direct or indirect quotes are helpful, so jot down any relevant statements by individuals, including their names. Where? The physical location of individuals or equipment will be important, so be as exact as you can. Record relevant serial numbers and descriptions of any area involved. When? The time of the incident is important. And why? The reason the incident occurred, if known. Watchers log tips and tricks. If you're wondering how you'll have time to record all the information and still have time to observe the voting process, here are some tips to streamline your writing. First, record all the names of the judges before the poll opens. That way, you won't be trying to figure out who is who or how names are spelled. Create shorthand codes for the judges. This can be as simple as initials or a short nickname. Record the seal and tape numbers for the voting units. If any incident occurs, you won't have to refer to the machine. You can refer to your list. Draw a map of the polling place with labels and locations of judges and objects. This will make the where descriptions a lot easier. On this slide is a sample map that gives you an idea of the kind of drawing that will be helpful. You don't need to be an artist. Just indicate locations. That can really be helpful when you're trying to remember where someone was standing. Watchers log tips and tricks. Other helpful tips involve formatting. Use standard, consistent format for recording each incident. This makes your log easier for others to read. There's a side benefit for you too. Once you have a pattern, you'll find you can describe incidences more quickly. Use the left column or margin to record time. Again, the log is easier to follow when the information is in a consistent place. Do not erase. It's possible that the deleted information would be important. Equally important, not erasing makes for a neater log. Cross out and initial corrections made. Just as you would do in a checkbook, put a single line through any deletions or corrections and initial them. By doing this, no one can accuse you of deleting information that might have been important. Have extra supplies on hand. That new pen could still run out of ink. You might need more paper. It's smart to bring extra. On this slide, you'll see an example of a sample log. Notice the consistent formatting, exact times, single cross outline, and clear designation of place. To improve this log, you should provide more detail about what happened when the lights went out, more detail about Janice Stevens' argument, exact words, information about who was at the registration area, and how the argument was handled. When do the polls close? The polls close after the last voter in line has voted. Every voter who is in line by 8 p.m. has the right to vote, and the end of the day procedures will not start until the last voter has finished voting. The closing time is the same for early voting, except early voting polling locations close at 6 p.m. on Sunday. As a poll watcher, you should plan to observe the poll closing. This requires that you be inside the polling place before the polls close. If you are not in the polling place when the polls close, the election judges are not required to let you in until the results have been printed from each voting unit and posted. What happens at poll closing? To certify that the voting has been properly conducted, a lot of activities take place. These are handled by the election judges. As a poll watcher, you will want to observe that each of these take place, but you will need to be careful not to get in any judge's way. The tamper tape must match the number recorded earlier in the day. You should observe this as closely as you can, if you can do so without getting in the way. You should also observe each of the steps listed on screen. A judge will set the ending the election option. A totals report is automatically generated. A second report is printed and posted. The memory card is removed and the machine is turned off. New tamper tape is applied and a new seal is put on the unit. What can poll watchers do during closing? Poll closing is a busy time for watchers too. It's important to observe all closing activities carefully without getting in the way of the judge. Remember that you can be removed if you interfere with the process in any way. The election judges will read the tamper tape numbers aloud, so you'll be able to record the numbers without having to see them. Another important number is the number in the electronic poll books. Take down the total number of voters recorded there. Other activities require the presence of a chief judge or other designated judge. If a chief judge accompanies you, these important activities may be observed. Observe election judges printing the totals reports. 2 copies of the totals reports are printed. The first one prints automatically and is connected to the 0 report. A second is printed to be posted in the voting room. Review the total report. Take a look at the totals report. You can record the information in your log. Verify new tamper tape has been applied and seal affixed to the outside of the unit. This certifies the integrity of the voting unit in the event that any questions or challenges arise. What happens after the voting machines are resealed? Once the voting machines have been resealed with tamper tape, all essential voting supplies are taken to the local election board facility. These include the memory cards, the orange ballot bags containing used provisional ballots, and any paperwork and critical supplies. Paperwork done by election judges include reconciled statistics from the voting units in the electronic poll books, paperwork associated with closing the polls, and a list to account for the election critical supplies. Judges will also remove signs from both inside and outside the voting room and generally clean up the voting room. A bonded transportation company will return the sealed voting units to the local board of elections. What are my rights as a challenger and watcher? You can see that a poll watcher stays busy throughout the long voting day. Let's look at the rights enjoyed by an accredited challenger and poll watchers. First, you can remain in the polling place throughout the voting hours, as well as half an hour before polling begins and until the judges leave. You can maintain a list of who voted or cast provisional ballots, and you can take out information identifying who voted and who did not yet vote. You cannot communicate that within the polling place, but you can leave to do so. Always be respectful of the election judges. They are responsible for the smooth and lawful running of the polling place, and they have a lot of influence over your ability to observe procedures and occurrences. Any questions? Please feel free to email questions to c.kelleher@electionintegritymaryland.com. Again, c.kelleher@electionintegritymaryland.com. We will answer your questions as soon as